When discussing the fall of the Roman Empire, most explanations begin with the end. The barbarian invasions, the sack of Rome, the deposition of the last emperor of the West in 476 AD, these events are visually striking. Easy to remember and easy to recount, but they explain very little. They show the collapse, not the process. The historical truth is that when Rome formally fell, it had already been weakened for a long time. The empire was not suddenly defeated by external forces. Over the centuries, it lost the capacity to sustain its own economic, administrative, and military complexity. And this weakening process began at a specific point, invisible to most traditional narratives, in currency. During the early centuries of the Roman Empire, especially between the reign of Augustus, which began in 27 BC, and the end of the Antonine dynasty with the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 AD, Rome built one of the most integrated economic systems of the ancient world. This period, which lasted just over 200 years, was not only an era of relative political peace, but also of extraordinary institutional stability. The basis of this system was a reliable currency. The Anaristi silver coin, the principal Roman currency, was minted with a significant amount of real silver. Its value depended not only on the emperor's authority or the strength of the legions, but on the objective belief that the coin contained concrete wealth. This allowed for something rare in the ancient world, an integrated monetary economy on a continental scale. A merchant in Hispania accepted the same currency as a farmer in Egypt. A soldier stationed in Britain received his salary in cash that was accepted in any major city of the empire. Taxes were collected in currency, and the state was able to plan revenues and expenses with relative predictability. This stability was no small feat. It allowed for economic specialization, urban growth, long-distance trade, and, above all, the maintenance of a permanent professional army, something extremely expensive. As long as the currency was reliable, the empire functioned. But no political system remained stable indefinitely. From the 2nd century onwards, the Roman model began to face a growing structural problem. The empire had reached its territorial limits. The great conquests, which for centuries had financed the state with tributes. Slaves and precious metals became rare or economically unviable. At the same time, costs continued to rise. Defending extensive borders required more soldiers. Maintaining large cities required more administration. Maintaining internal order required more coercive measures. The Roman state began to spend more and more without a proportional source of new revenue. This imbalance created a classic political dilemma that would repeat itself countless times throughout history: raise direct taxes or resort to indirect monetary solutions. Raising taxes generated revolts, cutting military spending was risky. The easiest, least visible, and most politically convenient solution was to manipulate the currency. The process began relatively discreetly, still in the 1st century. Under the rule of Nero, the silver content off denarisit was reduced significantly for the first time. In the short term, this allowed the state to mint more coins and finance its increasing spending. However, this decision created a dangerous precedent. Over the following centuries, especially during the reigns of emperors such as Septimius Severus and Caracalla, the practice intensified. The state began producing coins with less and less silver, while maintaining the same face value. On the surface, nothing had changed. The coins had the same shape, the same imperial symbols, the same inscriptions, but in practice, they were increasingly distant from representing real wealth. This is a fundamental point for understanding Roman history. The destruction of the currency was gradual. That is precisely why its effects took so long to be fully perceived. As coins of lower real value entered circulation, prices began to rise. Merchants were not naive. They realized they were receiving less real silver for their goods. The response was simple: demand more coins. Inflation began to erode purchasing power. Urban trade lost momentum. Regions further from the imperial center began to reject Roman currency or accept it only at a significant discount. The state, in turn, began to face increasing difficulties in collecting taxes and currency. The solution was to accept payments in physical goods: wheat, olive oil, wine, livestock. This represents a clear economic setback. An integrated monetary economy was fragmenting. Rome still existed politically, but its economy was losing cohesion. No institution reflected this process better than the Roman army. During the centuries of monetary stability, the legions were loyal because they received regular salaries and reliable currency, as well as predictable benefits after their service. The contract between the soldier and the state was clear. But when the money started to lose real value, that contract began to fall apart. From the 3rd century onwards, the loyalty of the legions became increasingly less dependent on reliable monetary wages and increasingly more dependent on looting, confiscation, and extraordinary promises. These raids were not random acts of violence. They became a structural part of the military system. Enemy cities were looted as a form of direct payment in real wealth. Precious metals, slaves, and goods were distributed among the soldiers. During civil wars, the properties of rival aristocrats were confiscated and appropriated by troops. In border regions, soldiers began demanding food, lodging, and goods from the local population, functioning as an informal military tax. When an army prefers confiscating goods to receiving wages, currency has already lost its essential function. If you're realizing that this story isn't just about Rome, but about how states deal with money, power, and crisis, now is the right time to subscribe to the channel. The following videos will show how this pattern repeats itself throughout history in very different contexts, but with surprisingly similar consequences. The most visible breaking point in this process occurred during the so-called crisis of the 3rd century. Between 235 and 284 AD, during this period, the Roman Empire faced an almost uninterrupted succession of civil wars, external invasions, and administrative collapse. In just over 50 years, dozens of emperors succeeded one another, many of them brought to power by the legions themselves and deposed shortly afterwards. Imperial authority became unstable and deeply dependent on immediate military support. This crisis was not just political or military. It was above all monetary. Currency had been so devalued that the state had difficulty supporting its own armed forces. Tax collection was inefficient. Trade was fragmented. Confidence had vanished. Imperial power came to depend less on economic management and more on the ability to promise immediate rewards to the troops. Attempts at correction came late and in an authoritarian manner. Emperors like Diocletian sought to reorganize the state through profound administrative reforms, attempting to restore revenue and stabilize prices. The famous Maximum Price Edict is a symbol of this effort. The state attempted to impose artificial limits on prices in an attempt to contain the effects of inflation. But price controls do not create monetary confidence. It is only hiding the problem temporarily. The economy became rigid, less dynamic, and more dependent on state coercion. The economic vitality that had characterized the first centuries of the empire was never fully restored. When the Western Roman Empire finally collapsed in the 5th century, it was already deeply weakened. Its cities were smaller, its trade more restricted, its tax collection inefficient, and its currency discredited. The barbarian invasions were the final blow, not the original cause. Rome didn't lose battles because it became weak. She became weak because she destroyed the economic base that sustained her power. Roman history offers a clear and unsettling lesson. Money is not merely an economic instrument, but the invisible infrastructure that underpins complex states. When this infrastructure is eroded, political and military power becomes unsustainable. Even if it still appears impressive on the surface, empires rarely fall suddenly. They weaken slowly.